Netflix is finding itself in all sorts of hot water, whether it be their latest drama Adolescence to their most recent animated show Devil May Cry. But maybe the biggest outrage might be what reports are saying they plan to do with C.S. Lewis's The Chronicles of Narnia. Joining me to discuss this hot button issue is Michael Grumbine. How do you say that?
Grumbine.
Grumbine from The One Ring. You might know him from theonering.com and the One Ring YouTube channel. I am pleased to have him here on the Trent Report for the first time to discuss what Netflix is doing. And I think maybe calling it an outrage might be underselling it. I find this absolutely despicable what they are doing here. I've talked about this previously, but I wanted to get your thoughts. So this is what the report here says. This is a second report. This one is actually coming from a Hollywood trade. This is coming from Deadline. Deadline's Andreas Weissman. He says Oscar winner Meryl Streep is in talks to play Aslan, the Great Lion, in Greta Gerwig and Netflix's Narnia movie. We have confirmed with sources. However, he does add, we understand that they're not quite at the offer stage yet. And so this report came after Nexus Point News said that an offer has been made to Meryl Streep to portray a central character in the series, Aslan, the Great Lion. And they added Streep is in talks to portray Aslan, who will be female in the series. So what do you make of that?
Well, always good to talk to you, John. So I agree with you. This is not just sort of a boo-boo or a weird take. This is kind of a direct slap in the face to all Christians who have read and loved the Narnia Chronicles, because as every Christian knows, and as anyone knows that has read the Narnia Chronicles, Aslan not only is not female, it's not just a sex swapping thing, as a gender swap as they like to do in Hollywood in the last decade or two of the slow or rapid decline. But Aslan is actually Christ, and not just an allegorical Christ. So C.S. Lewis himself addressed this a couple times in the past in letters to fans, where in 1958, I believe, as to a Mrs. Hook, he said explicitly that Aslan was not. He said if Aslan represented the immaterial deity, he would be an allegorical figure. In reality, however, he's an invention giving an imaginary answer to the question, what might Christ become like if there were a world like Narnia, and he chose to be incarnate and die and rise again in that world as he's actually done in ours. This is not an allegory at all. And then he brings up Paralandra, his space trilogy, where he says this is also works as a supposition, or a supposal, as he says in another letter, where essentially, so Aslan is not a magical lion. He is not, and the gender swapping him is an insult to Christians, because he's actually Christ, and he says so in as much to Lucy at the end of the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and or maybe it was. Yeah, I think it was Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe. I'm trying to remember if this is that or Prince Caspian, but in any case, he says it to her. He says, "I'm known in your world by another name, and you have to go back there and find." They
do
there.
it in the Dawn Treader, maybe.
Oh, the Dawn Treader. Okay, yeah, the last time that she appears, aside from the last battle. So, he is actually Jesus. This is not an allegory for Jesus. It is C.S. Lewis saying this is Christ. So for Gerwig to sex swap Aslan is akin to saying that Christ is female, and I don't know I don't know if this is deliberate or this is just total cluelessness, but either way, it's an insult to Christians and to those who love the books.
I find it really hard to believe that this is based on ignorance, because as you pointed out, C.S. Lewis made it abundantly clear who acids in that letter that you referenced, but he also said it in this other letter where a mother was concerned that her son Lawrence was loving Aslan more than Jesus. And this is what Lewis wrote in response. He says, Lawrence can't really love Aslan more than Jesus, even if he feels that's what he is doing. for the things he loves Aslan for doing or saying are simply the things Jesus really did and said. So that when Lawrence thinks he is loving Aslan, he is really loving Jesus and perhaps loving him more than he ever did before. Very clear there, right? There is no mistaking what C.S. Lewis thought about who Aslan was. And so for me I know as Christians, we're supposed to give the benefit of the doubt, but it's really, really hard for me to do that in this case when it's very abundantly clear in C.S. Lewis's letters, and it's also abundantly clear in the actual texts of the book too. I mean, you go back to just the first one, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I mean, he sacrifices himself on the stone tablet, rises again, literally descends to hell, goes back to the stone garden, brings those people back
to life,
back to life, right? As Christ did after he was crucified and was killed, and then he leads the battle against what is it, Jadis, the witch, the White Witch.
Yes.
So it's very difficult for me to believe that they don't know what C.S. Lewis was doing here and what this is, and this is done intentionally as an insult to Christians across the globe.
And this is, I agree with you, and I think that it's interesting because this is sort of the continuing the cycle that Rings of Power was doing with Tolkien's work, and the corruption of things that are good. They take now ostensibly there's a whole executive class behind her that's there to make money apparently, but it's hard to defend that the sort of business interest when you have a pattern of them warping the source material so much that it's almost guaranteed to piss off the people that are their audience. So I don't even know how you can defend the making money angle anymore. The best I could hope for, because I can't read her heart, but the best I can hope for is that it's some sort of expression of Greta's own faith. Like the whole gender swapping woke stuff is all an expression of a kind of faith that these people have. It's not a Christian faith. It's a different kind of religion. But at the best, it's that, and at the worst, it's an actual just trying to insult Christians, which by sort of tormenting them with, look what I can do with this Christ figure that is very clear in a beloved author and his beloved books. So it's just so far off the rails, and I wouldn't be surprised if we get more of this stuff as time goes on. Although it will be interesting to see what Streep and her agents do, given the backlash. So it would be interesting to find, because Gerwig is all on board with this, and I know Streep is a huge leftist herself, but it might not be worth it for her to just from the get-go, years in the making. I'm thinking of Rachel Zegler and the effect she had on ruining Snow White. Imagine if this is, for the next year or a year and a half, this sort of insult is stewed over by Christians, and the effect it's going to have on the movie. Maybe Streep backs away. Who knows?
Yeah, they're supposed to go to begin filming this July, I believe, and then it's supposed to release next Thanksgiving. And they already have like an exclusive deal with IMAX to actually release this to theaters before, or maybe at the same time it's released on Netflix. But you brought up an interesting point there about the legacy, I guess, of Snow White and what Rachel Zegler did to that. Do you think, I mean, I know that people are always, and you might have even argued this in the past with Tolkien, like obviously the books are still there, but we see kind of what they've been doing in the films, even not Peter Jackson, maybe to an extent, but the most recent one, War of the Rohirrim, the animated one, and then obviously what they're doing with Rings of Power. And it looks like they're going to be continuing this trend in Narnia. They recently did it with this Devil May Cry animated show. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but it's basically,
I haven't watched it, but I've heard of it. Yep.
Character Dante, he's a demon hunter, and they are literally like made the demons like the orcs in the Rings of Power, where they have like a family and they want to be sympathetic towards them and everything. Yeah, it's
The old sympathy for the devil thing. All right.
yeah, yeah. And so I know there's this argument that like you can't destroy the legacy of Tolkien, etc. The books are always there, but at the same time, people aren't reading anymore. People aren't reading the books. The people that were reading the books obviously are passing away, and a lot of times people are now either consuming movies, television, or video games, and they're not reading. And so these stories are being warped for future generations. And we've even seen Hollywood people say this. I always like to point to Jon Favreau. He says that what he's doing through movies and television is passing down values to the next generation. How do you see that? Do you see this as they can't actually destroy what Lewis is doing, or can they actually like twist and warp the minds of so many people into making them believe that Aslan is not Christ anymore and he's this woman?
Right. Of course they can. Of course they can. So we have an entertainment culture, and we have it's based on media, visual media, more than anything else. And as you mentioned, people have stopped reading these days. And so what you have is the media legacy of good books or great books is very, very important, and it's worth fighting over because they can indeed warp the man. Now, let me give an example which is not so egregious. So I'm a huge fan of Tolkien, as probably everyone can tell from my background and the podcast that I do on theonering.com with Jonathan Watson. But one of the segments we do off and on is analyzing Peter Jackson's treatment of Lord of the Rings, going through all the changes that he made, because he made a number of changes to the books. And what we argue is sometimes those changes are necessary for cinema. Sometimes they make a cinematic story better. Sometimes they're not. They warp the book and they warp the principles. Not very often, but overall, Peter Jackson's movies are the staple in the American and worldwide mind of what Tolkien is, for better or sometimes for worse, because of the fact that we're an entertainment culture and no one reads anymore, or very few people do. So there is a sense in which you're not going to destroy C.S. Lewis through this, because the books will always be there, and the people that teach their children to read books and read books themselves will always be able to enjoy that. However, in the culture at large, you can absolutely warp good ideas and good intellectual property. And more importantly, with Favreau, your quote with Favreau is applicable as well, because superhero movies are the epic stories of the American last century of America. Every culture. My background is in history, medieval history specifically, but every culture has epic stories that it tells about the values that it holds dear and wants to aspire to. And Tolkien very deliberately wrote an epic of the English-speaking people. He said so in a letter, and more than once actually. And so these stories are really important, whether they're the best of the Marvel and DC stories, because I'm an old comic book collector and I love some of the best old stories and old arcs, or if you're talking about real masterpieces like Narnia or like Middle Earth and the works that are written about them. These are values that they inform and form us as a people. And if you warp those values, you will warp the next generation to a lesser or greater extent who thinks that they're experiencing this. And so this is a battle worth having, I think, in the realm of ideas. And I, for one, my blood is up on this particular issue.
Yeah, even C.S. Lewis, I think, probably would agree with us, because he wrote this essay. I don't have it in front of me right now, but where he talks about how he came up with the Chronicles of Narnia. Obviously, talks about having the lion. He talks about it just came to him and he had this image, but then he went on and said, like, it was a way for me to tell Christ's story through the medium of the fairy story, and that was what he set out to do, because he felt maybe a little that the way that instruction to children was about Christ was happening was a little bit too stuffy, might be the right word. Yep. And so he was like, well, why don't I try to do it in a different way? And that's what he tried to do with this. And to me, when I see something like this is clear, obvious subversion meant to destroy and attack that story that points people in the right direction. It points people as Bishop Sheen likes to say, up towards God. I love that quote. But
Good
yeah.
quote. Yeah, good reference. Yep, I agree. And although with Narnia, his intention was more explicitly Christian, whereas in Tolkien's work, he talks about it as being unconsciously Christian at first, and then later consciously in the rewrites. They both used that medium of the fairy story, which I use the term fairy story because they did, and also because it's slightly different from fairy tale, because we think of fairy tale as children's stories, and for Tolkien and Lewis, the fairy story actually could be for children, but it was also for adults, and sometimes most explicitly for adults, because the themes in them were adult themes. And I don't mean in the prurient sense that we now always talk about adult themes. I mean the themes of mature people who wanted to aim themselves for virtue in their life, excellence in their life. So yeah, I think this is a kind of a shot across the bow for Christians, and we'll see how people react to it. We'll see if we can start to put a little more scrutiny on Gerwig in this make, and see. And if nothing else, if they go forward and they keep perverting Narnia, then at least we can punish them a bit for it, the way that Disney and the Snow White debacle has been punished for this, to the tune of losses of hundreds of millions of dollars. So
yes, and so one of the other things I wanted to ask you was, obviously they seemingly are going to still go ahead with this. They're supposed to be making 8 movies. The IMAX CEO has said the original deal was made in 2018, and they made it with Lewis's stepson. And the latest things I've heard from him is he's sick. Do you think that maybe that's something that they are taking advantage of? Because I feel like it's almost mirroring what we saw with the Rings of Power and what happened with Christopher Tolkien, and how
right
that all
now,
went.
here's where I would say the difference lies. I think they might be, and they obviously had to wait till Christopher Tolkien died, because he was an unbelievable guardian of his father's work throughout his life. But in the Rings of Power, the primary consultant from the Tolkien estate was Simon Tolkien, who's a grandson, I believe grandson. I might be wrong. He might be the great grandson, but I think he's the grandson. And Simon Tolkien is a stooge. I have other words, but I won't use them on a show like this. He was one of the he's all on board with twisting his grandfather's legacy to fit the modern narrative and his modern principles. And so that I don't know what the extent is to, as far as Lewis's legacy in that regard. I did years ago meet Walter Hooper, the secretary. I had dinner with him, of Lewis's secretary, who saved a lot of Lewis's letters, which were going to be destroyed, and also promoted his legacy. I think he died in 2020, but he was a wonderful man, and his this is the kind of thing that Lewis rather would be turning over in his grave. Although hopefully by the grace of God he's in heaven and won't have to worry about the turn of the grave part until the end of time. But there's a this is a thing which is clearly contrary to everything that C.S. Lewis would have believed. And so if they're twisting it, they're either twisting it because they're taking advantage, like you said, of the sickness of the guardian, or they have a guardian on their side, who's like Simon Tolkien, who's deliberately twisting it with them. So don't know the inside story on that. Although I do have someone who's working on the I can't say much, but working on the Gerwig production, and he is tearing his hair out and trying his best as a Christian to help things. But yeah,
Oh, no.
it's a bad scene inside.
Oof, okay. So final question. I've been following along with Deacon Harrison Garlick out of Oklahoma. Not sure if you're familiar with him. He runs a podcast called the Ascend the Great Books, and we're reading the Inferno, Dante's Inferno for
Dante.
Lent. And
Very
one
nice.
of the things that he talks about I think it's like Canto 4. I might be mistaken. This is my first time reading the Inferno. But he talks about how there are these people that are in hell because they had a lack of anger for things that they should have been angry about. Do you think that is something that affects our society today? Because we hear all the time people are outraged, they're angry, but and it's almost like a criticism that there's too much anger, too much outrage. But for something like this, where it's a clear insult of C.S. Lewis's work, it is an attack on Christians, it's an attack on God. Do you think there is enough outrage about it, or what are your thoughts?
Okay, well, good question. And appropriate your quote that you're referencing Dante. Obviously, so I have some Italian in my blood. My grandmother's 100% Sicilian. I got Italian on the other side, and being not angry enough is not a problem for Italians. They're good at getting angry. But what I do think is happening is we have an incredibly complacent culture, and luxury and hedonism, which is essentially our vibe, as the kids say nowadays. It dulls the sharpness of how the passions ought rightly to be formed towards the attacking evil and defending the good. So that's one of our jobs as adults in culture. And I agree. I do think that there's too much complacency, and I think realms like Lewis and Tolkien and the fictional realms of science fiction and fantasy are and Marvel and things like that. They have this built-in protection that against criticism that you hear from the other side of the aisle, and that is, why do you care so much? It's just a fantasy story. Who cares? And I think one of the interesting avenues we may be able to pursue in the future, if we can get our legs under us and the good people in the culture, and start attacking the warping of good literature, is that because our culture is so entertainment based, if we can feel passion again about those things that like fictional works that nevertheless express the deepest and argue for the deepest virtues, then that can be an avenue which can affect people. And I've seen that with Tolkien's work over the years. I've seen people that have grown to love the good more because of their love of Tolkien and his world and his work. So definitely think it's worth fighting. I do definitely think we're complacent. Dante would put a lot more people in is that the 8th circle of hell? I'm trying to remember which circle.
I think it's further up. 8th
Okay.
is like people with like fraud and violence. I think
that's 5th is fraud.
Yeah, I think it's right.
I'm pulling a memory from 32 years ago, so don't quote me on this, internet. Don't come at me. But there definitely is like Dante was not shy about putting people in his time in placing them in hell, so to speak, because of he cared so much about the evils that they did, and wanted to show people, look, avoid this. So I think complacency is one of the biggest sins of our culture. So to agree with you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me here to discuss what Greta Gerwig and Netflix are doing with the Chronicles of Narnia. Hopefully, the outrage around these reports is able to change minds over there, and your friend, your source, is able to keep some of his hair.
Yeah, he's one of thousands, but it's a train wreck internally, and if we can ever get together for a cigar, we can talk more. But yeah, it's some interesting stuff. But mostly this is the mold that our culture produces, the moral mold, and so we gotta attack it. We got to start cleaning it out and do what we can. So appreciate the time, John.
Yeah, thank you so much. Where can people find you?
Oh, people can find me at theonering.com, where I have a podcast with Jonathan Watson. That's one of the oldest Tolkien sites on the internet. It's been around for 20-something years. And so we have a great time there. And there will soon be a second podcast. I have a great love of Chesterton that I'm producing with Ethan Nicole from the Babylon Bee and Daily Wire. So that's a lot of fun as well. So people can find me there.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And we will see you next time.
Take care.
God bless.